Welcome into Studio A. I'm Maria Trivelpeice alongside Kyle Youmans for a special edition of All-American. It is bowl season, so we have to break down every single matchup because we have eight American Conference teams playing in bowls.
How many teams?
8. 2 hands. Count them all.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On to the second hand we go. 7, 8 teams. Is that more or less than what you thought going into the year?
Well, I think at the beginning of the year, I wasn't even here at the
You were
American
at the Patriot
Conference.
League.
Yeah, so I was like FCS football back then. But
I'll
I think
say 7.
Okay.
I had 7 teams in my at least peripheral saying, hey, here goes the American Conference in the bowl season. So I think overachieving, getting 8 teams in there and the opportunity to continue your season is awesome across the board.
I know it's exciting, and I'm excited to see how our teams perform as well because I think a lot of them are peaking at the right time. They have some beatable opponents, and I think, as we'll talk the rest of the show about it, I think there's some good opportunity for the American.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to make some noise in bowl season. The bowls that you've got, of course, Memphis, West Virginia, and the Frisco Bowl, Tulane, Florida, Gasparilla Bowl, UTSA playing against Coastal Carolina in their own stadium at the Myrtle Beach Bowl. We'll preview that game, of course, coming up here in a little bit. South Florida, San Jose State, Navy versus Oklahoma in the Armed Forces Bowl, East Carolina, NC State in the Military Bowl, Army versus Louisiana Tech, kind of an interesting scenario there in the Independence Bowl, and then rounding it out on January 3rd, North Texas taking on Texas State in the Armed Forces Bowl, or in the First Responders Bowl as well. So lots to look forward to across the bowl slate, and we're going to preview every single one of those games on All-American today, but we do have one game to review. How about Navy taking down Army 31-13 in Landover, Maryland? The celebration is still going on for the midshipmen to this day. It is a moment, a game, a night they will never forget, taking down a top 25 ranked Army team, a team coming off of the American Championship just 1 week prior, and in dominating fashion, to say the least.
The midshipmen got to sing second, and they were doing some talking after the game as well. This is from quarterback Blake Horvath. He says, I guess we still have a football program. He tweeted it at the Pat McAfee show. We talked about this earlier in the year on All-American, Kyle. Jeff Monken went on Pat McAfee. They asked him about Navy being undefeated, and he said, do they still have a football program down there in Annapolis? And talk about keeping receipts. Blake Horvath and the entire midshipman squad certainly kept the receipts, and they were ready to rock and roll. After the game, Brian Newberry, his first answer to Jenny Dell was even, yes, we still have a football program here in Annapolis. So, I was living through the pettiness of the midshipmen this past week in the Army-Navy game.
I thought it was fantastic, and it's the best way to clap back is by waiting, letting your play speak for itself on the field. Blake Horvath, with 2 weeks leading into this matchup, took every opportunity that they needed to. And we talked about this last week, which Navy team was going to show up, which team was going to play in America's game. Was it going to be the Navy team we saw down the stretch against teams like Notre Dame, Rice, Tulane, where they did not play well? Or was it going to be the team we saw start 6-0 going into that Notre Dame game and take down some high-level competition like Memphis early in the season, take down South Florida 28-7 on the road? There were multiple times in this season where you and I both looked at each other and said, Navy's the real deal. Well, I think when the season came to a close and they weren't in the conference championship game, they weren't necessarily ending the season on a high note, we looked at each other and said, what's next for the Navy midshipmen? They knew what was next, and that was on the schedule in the Army Black Knights. Army wins the American Conference Championship. Congratulations to Army. We gave them their flowers last week. But Navy came out with a fierce mindset. They came out ready to kick some butt, and they did. They ran the ball down the field. They continuously forced the issue against the defense that had really had success against everybody they had played throughout the year in Army, and Navy controlled the line of scrimmage, which was the biggest key that you and I mentioned going into that matchup.
And then another key that we also talked about was utilizing that rest to their advantage, right? Yes. They had those weeks off to prepare. They had those weeks off to get healthy. Blake Horvath in particular, we knew that he was struggling with some injury. He looked incredibly healthy. He looked like that Horvath for Heisman that we talked about earlier in the season. And so they controlled the line of scrimmage, but they also just looked so fresh. There was never a moment where they let up. And another thing that we talked about was that they needed to shut down Bryson Daly because that is what gets that Army offense going. Total of just 113 yards rushing for the entire Black Knights team. In that American Conference Championship game, Daly had more yards rushing by himself. And so I think Navy did everything that they were supposed to do offensively with Horvath, defensively controlling Bryson Daly. They just looked so good. And man, they really sang second well because they were incredibly petty. They used that to their advantage as well.
It was awesome. And their offensive line was the first thing that stuck out to me as the game was going on. The physicality that they showed. And we talked about that as a key. Last week you asked, what was the key going into this game? I said, Navy's got to match the physicality of Army early and lay down the wall, say this is what this day is going to bring, buckle up and follow along with us. And that's exactly what they did. The offensive line dominated early, and then the defense picked it up as well, because when the offensive line for Navy was nearly perfect, Army was not. Army had some mistakes. They had some lapses, whether it was coming off of a tough game last week against Tulane, the height of winning a conference championship. You had an extra day. Of course, that game was on Friday. You go all the way into Saturday in Landover. Another week of travel, getting from West Point back down to Landover. I think for the most part, when Army had a shot down by 4, it was 14-10, that's when Navy ramped it back up again. So not only did Navy ramp up from the opening drive, go down, score, establish that run game early, when it got to within striking distance for Army, Blake Horvath said, hold on, let's do this again. Go back down the field, you drive all the way through, and he finished up with 204 rushing yards, even had the 2 passing touchdowns, which I thought that was the best highlight and microcosm of what this team had done all season when they were winning games, is that sling T approach, not being afraid to throw the football. And it did. It kept the Army defense off balance, which is something we really hadn't seen anybody have success doing outside of Notre Dame this season.
And, they weren't afraid to throw the football, but they weren't afraid to do pretty much anything in that game. I think that was one of the biggest differences I saw, is when you get into a rivalry game like that, right? There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of juices flowing. You need to bring that confidence, and that's exactly what Navy did. We'll see it. We'll preview it in the top plays, but there was even a fake punt. You had a big man go for a run. They just recovered fumbles. There were so many different things that Navy just played fearless.
Forced turnovers.
Exactly. And it kept Army on their heels a little bit. I just feel like Army never had the opportunity to take a step forward and just play with the aggressiveness that has helped them be successful all year. Navy did that from the start, and that's a big reason why they were able to not only win that game, but dominate it.
Yeah, 31-13. It was really an impressive outing, and probably the best game Navy has played all year, and the second worst game that Army has played all year, and that's a credit to what the midshipmen have done, and they've earned the bragging rights moving forward. Now, to one of the teams that played close against the Navy midshipmen earlier in the year, they kick off bowl season in Frisco, Texas, a little bit early. At the time of this recording, this game has not been played yet. Of course, we do understand that whenever this is playing live, it will have already concluded, but we're going to preview it as is, and if you want to go back and watch the replay, then we give you an extra opportunity to do so. So, Memphis seeking its second 11 or more win season. Of course, you got to go all the way back to 2019 where they had 12 wins. They were American Conference champions. This is a team with just one of 7 teams in the FBS with 11 or more consecutive bowl game appearances, along with, listen to these names: Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Iowa. That's blue blood of college football, and the Memphis Tigers have an opportunity to go for their 11th straight bowl appearance, take on West Virginia out of the Big 12.
I mean, just being mentioned in the same names, in the same sentence as those names.
As those programs,
right. I think it says a lot about the Memphis program, and it also is a Memphis program that right now is playing some really good football.
Sure.
I think I was so impressed with them in that game against Tulane, just in the way that they dominated. We talked about Navy dominating Army from start to finish. That's exactly what Memphis did against Tulane, and I think that they're going into a bowl game. They have nothing to lose. They have everything to play for. And they're behind Seth Hennigan, who wants to close out his college career with even more records, because he has broken so many in his time at Memphis, not only at the university that he attends, but also in the American Athletic Conference.
Oh, man, he's been so good. And we've talked about him really throughout his career and what he's done with now 100 passing touchdowns. But you mentioned the way that they've played down the stretch. They've won 7 of their last 8. Their only loss was in that 44-36 back-and-forth affair with UTSA at the Alamo Dome, where nobody ends up winning nowadays. But in those games, the one thing that stuck out to me, let's just look at the last 3 games. This is against Rice, UAB, and Tulane. Seth Hennigan's numbers in terms of passing, 159, 299, and 218. So not a single 300-yard passing game. He had one that was knocking on the door there. But Mario Anderson Jr., from a running back standpoint, here are his numbers over those last 3 games. 144, 138, and 177. They've relied on Mario Anderson Jr. You're going up against a West Virginia team that is 12th in the country in terms of rushing defense. You got to be better in this game at establishing the run. I want to see how this team continues to build on the success that they've had and go up against a really good rushing defense from West Virginia and establish it with guys like Mario Anderson Jr. And then, of course, you've got the passing attack with Seth Hennigan all day.
Well, I think that just goes to your point. I think that's actually plays to Memphis's benefit, right? Because if they have to fall back on the passing game of Seth Hennigan, I think that's a pretty good spot to be in, right? So the fact that they have Mario Anderson Jr. to do what he has done and then Seth Hennigan to air it out, I think that's going to be really helpful for the Memphis Tigers. And then that kind of leads me to my question for you. When you look at your keys for this game, what are they?
It's established the ground game for Memphis because you've got West Virginia. I mentioned the run defense. Their rushing attack is ranked number 27 in the country as well. They're really good at running the football. They average over 192 yards per game, which is number 9 amongst Power 4 teams in the country. Jaheim White is their go-to back, but they have 2 or 3 guys that they'll give the football to. And West Virginia has held 18 of its last 24 opponents to fewer than 300 yards passing. So that defense is legit. They've had some guys leaving the portal. It's going to be a different defense, I think, for the most part, going up against Memphis that hasn't had a ton of decimation from the portal. And we're going to talk about how much that plays an impact in these games, too, as we go along. So you got to play sound in the front 7 as well. So on the offensive side, got to establish the run because of how good they are at slowing down the passing attack. And then you play sound in that front 7. WVU, they run the ball because of their offensive line. You got to establish that line.
So that will be your keys for that Memphis matchup.
What about you?
For me, see, I don't like when you go first.
Oh, gosh. You asked the question.
I know. I really set myself up for that. I have similar ones. I think for me, I'm relying more on Seth Hennigan. I think that he has just been the catalyst for this offense. I know you talked about the numbers from the last 3 games, and yes. I know that Mario Anderson Jr. has done a really good job for Memphis, but I think this is Seth Hennigan's last game, right? He's a senior. He wants to go out with a bang. He's been leading this team his entire career. He was the first true freshman to start at Memphis. He wants to end on a high note. I think the biggest key for me is just rely on him. Let him win you a football game. That's my key for the Memphis Tigers.
And I'm going to correct one little minor mistake. Whenever I was talking about the run defense from West Virginia, they're 55th in the league in the NCAA, not 12th. So there's an opportunity for run game specifically. So I just wanted to backtrack. 55th overall in terms of run defense, but they are a team that has held their opponent under 300 yards passing in 18 of their last 24 games. So better at stopping the pass than they are at stopping the run. So I like your keys as well. So I'll let you start this one out then. How about that? Tulane and Florida. Gasparilla Bowl. This is going to be a fun matchup. Even though Darian Mensah's not available for Tulane in this game, the Green Wave have a lot to prove against the SEC opponent in Florida that's playing better football down the stretch than they did at any point in the entire season. Of course, they've had a couple big wins over some legitimate programs along the way. Teams like Ole Miss, LSU, Mississippi State helping them get to that bowl-eligible mark. Where do you see this game going from the get-go?
So I think if I'm Tulane, I am chomping at the bit to get back on the football field because that.
I see what you did there, chomping at the bit. And
there we go, chomping. I actually did that by
gators,
accident.
yeah.
I really wish I did that on purpose, but in my mind, that was just the phrase that I was going with. It would have made me sound a lot smarter. But again, chomping at the bit to get back on the football field because for Tulane, they were so close to making the college football playoff, right? They had that game against Memphis. If we said if they beat Memphis, they beat Army in the American Championship game.
Yeah.
And then what happens? 2 losses. So I think that if I'm Tulane, I think that this is an exciting time because you have an opportunity to show just how good of a football team that you can be. Now, as you mentioned, Darian Mensah not available, but John Summerall coming back to Tulane. He made a cool announcement on Twitter. I really like that man's social media. He used the Wolf of Wall Street gif. That was one of my favorite things. I think we talked about it last week. So I think the fact that you're establishing there's leadership, right? You know that he's going to be there. Now this is an opportunity for you to highlight what you've done so far this season, but also continue to build for that next season and just show that Tulane is a good football program, which everybody knows. Yeah. But now they have an opportunity to do it against an SEC opponent.
Well, and I think one thing that you pointed out there that plays a factor into all of this is now that it's all hindsight 2020, if you would have won your last two games, if you would have won the finale against Memphis and you beat Army, with all the chaos that happened in college football, I think it's safe to say Tulane would be in the college football playoff. They would have been one of the top 5 teams. That's why a team like Arizona State had a bye going into it, because they made the college football playoff at a higher ranking, and they weren't even close to where Tulane was 2 weeks with 2 weeks remaining going into the end of the regular season. So with all that being said, and seeing it now hindsight 2020 and that pressure off of the table, you can play free again.
Yeah.
The pressure, you're playing with house money now if you're Tulane. You don't have your starting quarterback in Darian Mensah. Ty Thompson is entering the portal as well after this game comes to a conclusion. So even the starting quarterback for Tulane has the future on the mind, whether that's in New Orleans and he pulls out of the portal and he says, hey, maybe this is the right place for me to be, or if he does move on afterwards. This is a chance for these guys to end the season on a significantly higher note than losing your final 3. There's a lot on the line, but the pressure is just different for Tulane as a whole.
Well, I think that pressure might have gotten to them a little bit. And you know, as an athlete or a coach, you never want to say that it does. But there are instances when it just becomes a lot, right? It's really hard to block out that outside noise. I like that Ty Thompson is starting at quarterback for Tulane because, as you said, he's in the portal. He could pull out of it, but I think the one thing for Tulane, I think that's a benefit because Mensah played and started. He was the guy most of the season, but Thompson got some snaps, and you saw it in multiple games where he had the opportunity to prove what he can do. And so it's not like he's completely inexperienced. He knows the system. He's had some live game reps as well, and so I think that can help Tulane because sometimes you get in these bowl games and you're just playing people who have never played before because half your team's in the portal, the other half maybe is injured. It's just a free-for-all. So I think that this is a benefit for Tulane, but they will have to play a tough opponent in Florida.
Well, and remember that Ty Thompson spent 3 seasons at Oregon, was the backup to Bo Nix, decided to go to Tulane for a chance at competing for that starting job. Mensah wins the starting job. So he's not afraid of power for power competition like Florida. Now, what a coaching job it's been by Billy Napier even to get to this point. There were times throughout the season where experts around the country were looking at Florida's schedule and saying there's no way they make it to a bowl game. But then they had the wins against LSU and Ole Miss and Mississippi State. A big reason why they've had some success is their freshman quarterback, and DJ Lagway has found their rhythm. Look at the touchdown, the interception numbers, the 5-1 record as a starter down the stretch, over 1,600 yards throughout, and these are all over just the 6 starts that he's had. They have some future there in terms of the Florida quarterback situation. Is that enough to say, hey, they have an established starter at quarterback, whereas Ty Thompson is a one-man trying to make a one-game statement moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think if you're Florida, you're probably a little bit more confident in your quarterback situation than Tulane is. And as you mentioned, Lagway has come in and really taken control of this offense. And I think that that's one thing, I have that in my keys actually, is that Tulane needs to. I'll preview some of my keys, but I think
go ahead and give me your keys.
I'll give
what
you.
are the keys?
They have to shut down Lagway. I think that's the biggest thing. I think you have to try to rattle him. I don't think it's something that's very easily done because he's shown that he can perform against some of those top opponents, and so that's my key. And then on the Tulane side, I mean, this has been my key for every Tulane game is you got to let Mekhi Hughes. Yes. And I don't know if that's a verb, but we're making Mekhi Hughes a verb as well because I think that was a big hindrance for the Green Wave in that Army game because he did not run as we've seen him run in the past. So I think that you got to let him just do his job, but you have to shut down Lagway and rattle him a little bit, because if you can do that and you rely on Hughes a little bit more, that takes some of the pressure off Ty Thompson, and it puts the Green Wave in a good spot.
I love the point of Mekhi Hughes, because if you look at what he's done against power competition, Oklahoma, Kansas State, he ran for over the century mark in those games. He's already shown that he can have success against high-end talent, and we've talked with some of the best college football analysts across the country on this show throughout the season, and they've all kind of agreed and said he's a top 5 running back in the country in a heavy running back class that's going to include guys like Ollie Gordon and Ashton Genty, of course, who was a Heisman finalist and the Heisman runner-up this year. They've got running backs all over the country, and Mekhi Hughes is as good as advertised across the way. You've got to take pressure off of the quarterback situation. Ty Thompson's an experienced quarterback. He's been around the game. You mentioned the snaps that he had in Tulane, the snaps that he had at Oregon, both in backup situations, but he has been around college football. He can take you to where you need to go against Florida, plain and simple. So if you're able to do things with Mekhi Hughes, take the pressure off of them as a whole, that's going to be significant. But do not go into this bowl game anticipating a Florida team that's going to just fly by and say, you know what, it's a bowl game. We're 6-6. This is a Florida team that's happy to be there, which is rare for a 6-6 powerful program and a high-end blue blood program of college football to say, hey, we're excited to be 6-6 and in a postseason game. But this team is. Do not take them lightly going into it. Not that they would in the first place. Tulane's pretty good about that, well coached. However, you cannot let this Florida team get off to a hot start, because it's going to put pressure on Ty Thompson in order to get that game done.
Yeah, and another team that's probably happy to be in a bowl game because of the way that they started out is UTSA. And so I think we can take a look there in the Myrtle Beach Bowl. We talked about this earlier. They're actually going to be playing Coastal Carolina at Coastal Carolina.
On the teal turf.
On the teal turf. So very exciting. But yeah, if you would have told me at the beginning of the year that UTSA was going to be in a bowl game after they started 2-4, I'd be like, Kyle, what are you talking about? It's like when you told me about bowling on Thanksgiving. I wouldn't have believed you.
And about ECU going to a bowl game, too.
I know. We're not at ECU yet. And
You never asked me about UTSA. I probably would have said the same thing.
I didn't. But I did ask you about ECU.
Here's the thing about UTSA, though. And if you were to ask Jeff Traylor, probably off the record, because he's very calculated whenever he's in front of a microphone. And he had a great point this week. Maybe we'll get to it, maybe we won't, about NIL and the future of college athletics. However, if you would have asked him off the record, I bet you he classifies this as a disappointing season. I really do. And that's because they were picked to finish second in the conference. They were picked to be in contention for the college or for the American Conference Championship. Who knows, maybe college football playoff at some point, just because of how highly they were anticipated going into the year. They did not live up to expectation because of the 2-4 start. But I bet you he also says he's happy with the way his team fought down the stretch and never gave up. Those wins, the 4 wins in the final 6 games, and the way that they battled some of the top teams in the conference, those are culture-building wins. And this is an opportunity for one more. No matter how bad Coastal Carolina has been decimated by the portal, and they have been a team that has taken a hit in the portal. Yes. UTSA has their starting quarterback, Owen McCown, back. You have a number of your top wide receivers there. Unfortunately, you don't have DeCorian Clark because that NFL caliber receiver tore his ACL. He's out for the year, out for a significant amount of time. He'll miss the entire draft process as well, which is a huge bummer because he did have a chance to go and get picked in the NFL draft. However, you have weapons like Henry and Barnes and McCoy and Carpenter, Amador, all of these guys that you can rely on the offensive side of the football. Plus, your defense has been playing lights out, especially in that secondary.
Yeah, I've liked everything that they've done in this second half of the season. And, we talked so much about how they're good at home, right? Yeah. And how they haven't played
now they're playing on the road in a bowl game.
At somebody's home field. The irony of that it's UTSA has to go to somebody's home field and play them on their home field. But I will say, with all that, their last game against Army, they looked pretty good. There were some minor mistakes that eventually cost them when you're playing the team that would go on to win the American. When you can't make those small mistakes. But I feel like so many other times we've seen them on the road, they looked really bad, right? And so I think that you can compete with one of the best team in the American because they won. We are not gonna in conference play.
Sure.
We're not going to talk about Army-Navy. We already did that. We gave Navy their flowers. They did a fantastic job.
They're champions.
But at the time, UTSA was playing the best team in the American, and they held their own. I think that's another moment that you can capitalize on. I agree with you in the fact that if you ask Jeff Traylor what this season looked like, it might be a little bit disappointing because of where you were picked to finish. But I think there's still an opportunity to put an exclamation point on this season. And I think that doing this against Coastal Carolina, as you said, a team that's been hit hard by the portal, I think this is a great way to do it. And you also have Owen McCown, who just really showed himself in that second half of the season. I feel like every week, once he really moved into that starting role and just basically showed up every week, he was throwing the ball so well.
Yeah, he was one of the better quarterbacks in the conference as the season went on. He got better and better, and the fact that they have him available for this game and moving forward is a significant upgrade for Coach Traylor, for this team as a whole. They're favored by 7.5 against Coastal Carolina, and a lot of that is because of what happened in the portal, and that's going up against a team that's playing at home. And a lot of times you classify as playing at home as a good thing. We just talked about the Alamo Dome and what type of advantage that gives to UTSA. But when it's a bowl game, it's kind of interesting. I'm intrigued to see how Coastal gets up for this game, because you're playing at home, which is great. You could get up and say, hey, we're playing in front of our home crowd, get to sleep in our own beds. You don't have the travel inadequacies going into a bowl game and all that stuff. And you still get some good fanfare. You ever been to Myrtle Beach?
No.
It's a fun city. And so you can still have some fun in Myrtle Beach and have the parade or whatever they end up doing. Usually it's like a concert series or whatever it is around a bowl game. They still have all that, but it's in their hometown. Or you can say, we've lost a lot in the portal. We're not going to get up for this game because we're playing on our home field. It's not anything special compared to what we've seen in the past. A lot of times you get to go and travel to a cool place. You're playing at home. You're already playing in Myrtle Beach. So you're going to see one or two ways that this Coastal Carolina team is going to attack this thing. I think we know how UTSA is going to attack it. So I really do think UTSA has a great shot to win this game and maybe win it big. They do. The way they've been playing football lately, the way they've figured things out with Owen McCown and that offensive system, they're going to be a tough team to beat in that Myrtle Beach Bowl.
Yeah, and I think this was the note section where I was like, Kyle took my keys. So I'll let you go with the keys that we both put down, and we talked a lot about Owen McCown already.
Well, we could say it at the same time. You say 2 words. 1, 2, 3.
Owen McCown.
Let the man cook. Let him roll.
Let him cook.
and that's the thing. With the way he's played football lately and all those weapons that I outlined earlier, give him the rock and let him loose. Owen McCown's going to lead you to victory on the teal turf, and then don't look back and get him ready for next year as well. There's a lot to look forward to for UTSA.
Now, you mentioned Myrtle Beach being a fun place to visit, but I think if I could pick any bowl that I wanted to go to,
the Frisco Bowl.
I'm going to go to the Frisco Bowl. But
West Virginia, Memphis, baby.
The Hawaii Bowl. Come on now, Kyle. Out of all the places, I would love to maybe not play football in Hawaii. I feel like that'd be really hot. But I would, and I've never played football before. My dad wouldn't let me. That's a whole different story that we don't have time for. Okay. Anyway, I would love to watch a football game in Hawaii, and that's where South Florida gets to go. They're going to take on San Jose State.
How fun. What a trip that is, though, from South Florida to Hawaii. And, I mean, San Jose State at least gets the West Coast to Hawaii trip, which is still a beating in its own right. But South Florida to Hawaii, you can almost fly the other way around the earth and get there quicker. Not really. I know that's not the truth. But
we're not doing geography here. We're talking
I'm great
about
at geography.
Football. Yes.
It's just a joke. However, I think when you look at the opportunity for South Florida to cap off a season where they've probably underachieved the early goals set, but with the situation at hand, you lose Byron Brown early in the year, you go with Bryson Archie at quarterback, and you kind of figure things out along the way, they have a chance to cap off what it will be a fun season and another bowl win for South Florida after they won their bowl game 45-0 last year.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about building a football program, I think that's one thing that you have to remember is there were really high expectations. I know coming into this season, just seeing them, even when they played Alabama, I was like, oh, this could be a really good football team. But with Byron Brown getting hurt and Bryce Archie having to step into that role, it was just uncertain of what was actually going to happen. And you had some moments where they just didn't look really good. They made a lot of mistakes. But I think, going back to what you just said, is this could be an opportunity to capitalize. And I think that they've had some moments where they've played better that I'm excited to see that they can build upon that. This is only Alex Golish's second year. So as you said, 45-0 in that bowl game last year. Wins another bowl game this year. That's going to start bringing more people to the Bay, and then you can see them build. I think the one thing that's unfortunate about the way college football is today, you don't really have a lot of opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
If you don't win immediately, a lot of times you're out, as we've seen in the American this season. So the fact that Alex Golish is still there, he wins this bowl game, he keeps his job, and then he can continue to build in the Bay with some weapons that I think can be helpful as time goes on.
No, I like that. All right, I've got a little side note and trivia question for you.
Oh, no. Okay, I'm not going to Google it, but I might get it completely wrong.
Which team won the first ever Hawaii Bowl? And it's not South Florida, but they are an American Conference team currently.
Currently an American
Yes.
Conference.
We've already talked about them on this show.
Oh, okay. Memphis.
No, good guess.
Okay.
It's not, though.
UTSA.
No, one more try before I give it to
Who
you.
else did we talk about today?
We talked about a couple.
Tulane.
It is the Tulane Green Wave. 36-28 over Hawaii in the Hawaii Bowl.
What
South
year?
Florida, that was 2002.
Ooh,
It was 36-28. They scored 20 points in the third quarter. What is one thing that we've talked about this South Florida team throughout the season? They are a second half team. That's just the one way I'm going to tie it all back together.
Okay.
First ever trip for South Florida out to the Hawaii Bowl. It's the second straight trip for San Jose State. They were in it last year and lost in the Hawaii Bowl to Coastal Carolina, who we just talked about is facing UTSA. So the last team that went from the East Coast out to Hawaii won. So let's give it up for South Florida and see what they can do this week. What are your keys to the game?
Keys to the game. Okay, well, see, we have to talk about San Jose State before we get to the keys because there's somebody that you're excited about on San Jose
how could
State.
I forget Nick Nash?
I know. I was like, I can't give it away because that's part of my keys. So
Nick Nash is one of the more fun players to watch in all of college football. No, he doesn't play for an American Conference team, but yes, he did lead the nation in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdown. One of the best receivers that that group of five football has seen ever across the board because of what he's done from a receiving standpoint. I thought he should have won the Biletnikoff over Travis Hunter because of what he's done, and I was even watching some film from Nick Nash for the upcoming NFL draft. He's going to be a draft pick and maybe even a top 100 pick. He's a legitimate player. He's going to be a problem if he does indeed end up playing. He's going to be a problem for this secondary of South Florida to deal with.
Yeah, so going into my keys, limit Nick Nash. That's my
Okay, that's
number
a good
one
key.
key. That's why I could not
Easier
say
said than done.
Easier
just so
said
you
than
know.
done. I'm not saying I could do it in any capacity, but that's my key. And then South Florida also has to limit their mistakes. That's one thing that Alex Golish has talked about the entire season is they make really silly little mistakes. I think there was one time I was speaking with him in an interview and he was like, we literally practice every day throwing and catching the football. It sounds so simple, but that's what we have to do to win football games. I like it though because I think we get so caught up in not just football but any sport of like the bigger picture when it all comes down to throwing, catching, running, blocking, right? And so I think South Florida can do that on the smallest scale and then limit Nash. They give themselves the best opportunity to win.
Limiting Nash is going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that gives you a possibility there is because almost all your starters in the secondary, if you're South Florida, are all upperclassmen. You have some experience, a couple transfers, a couple guys that have moved into that second level of that defense. And because you do have some overarching experience there, then you have an ability to possibly slow down a guy like Nick Nash. I think Nash is still going to get his own. They're going to feed him. He's great yards after the catch. They're going to get him underneath that West Coast system. They're going to continue feed the rock to Nick Nash. I agree with you in the fundamental aspect of it. You got to be great at one thing in order to win this game, I feel like, because you'll do everything else from a fundamental standpoint. Tackling. You've got to tackle. Whether it's Nick Nash or whoever else on the San Jose State side of things, tackle well, and I think you'll end up winning the football game. Now, Let's move from this game into one of my favorite matchups of the entire bowl season, American Conference or not. How about the Navy midshipmen, fresh off of their conquer of Army in the Army-Navy game, taking on the SEC's Oklahoma Sooners in the Armed Forces Bowl. I cannot wait for this matchup. I've already secured my tickets. I'm going to make my way to this game. Ooh. It's going to be a blast. I'm excited to watch how this one unfolds because I'm going to spoil it a little bit here. I think Navy wins this game.
See, you know what really upsets me?
What's that?
You just said two statements that I agree with. Like, I had it. I hate when we agree.
Nice.
I know. I'm a little bummed because this is one of my favorite bowl games to watch. I have this one circled. And I think Navy's going to win. So there's two things that Kyle and I agree with. Although,
shockers.
Shout out to Navy because, not shout out, I'm holding Navy accountable because the last time I picked you made me. Didn't go well. It did not go well. So please make me look smarter this time. But I have to agree. I think this is going to be a great matchup. Navy and Oklahoma. Oklahoma didn't have the season that they thought they were going to have, but they beat Alabama. And
24-3.
Yep. And that literally kept Alabama out of the CFP. So I think they have the capability to be a really good football team. Navy is, as you said, flying high off that win against Army. And they are healthy. When Navy is healthy, when Blake Horvath is healthy, they are a very good football team. There's a reason they were undefeated for so long in the season, and they were playing good opponents as well. And so I think that this SEC opponent with a good Navy team is just going to be a really good football game.
Do you remember what I said about Florida a couple segments ago when previewing the Gasparilla Bowl against Tulane, and how I said Florida as a 6-6 SEC team is happy to be in that bowl game? I don't feel that way about Oklahoma, and I could be wrong. I could be. Brent Venables could have them ready to go, and they may have some success in this bowl game. And they're playing semi-close to home with this game being in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and, of course, that being a short drive from Norman. This will be an Oklahoma-heavy crowd. But Navy, as a team that has seen Oklahoma before, prior to the Venables era, has seen high-level competition throughout the year, and knows how to utilize that sling tee attack, which is something Oklahoma has not seen at any point, and the lack of motivation, injuries across the board, and the portal being a factor against the Oklahoma Sooners. That's where I think Navy has the overarching advantage. Should they be favored in this game? Probably not. Oklahoma's like a 9.5-point favorite, and that's fair. I get it, because they do have the higher recruiting talent. They have the more depth. But what they don't have is the motivation to continue off of what just happened in Army-Navy and going into a matchup like this. Call me crazy. That's fine. If you're in the comment section, you disagree with me, go ahead and say it. I don't care. I think Blake Horvath's going to have this team ready to rock. I think we saw something from Eli Heidenreich, from Alex Teska that we needed to see in that game against Army. If they control the line of scrimmage again like they did in that matchup, Horvath's going to have a phenomenal game just like he's had a phenomenal season.
Yeah, he was absolutely incredible in that game, and that kind of leads me into my keys. And my biggest key for Navy is confidence, because I think that was the difference between them. That was the difference between them and Army in that matchup, right? They were confident in Horvath. They were confident in running trick plays. They were confident in just attacking and just not being afraid to use that sling tee, as you said. And Oklahoma's never seen that before against an opponent like Navy. So I think that those are some of my keys. Play confident, utilize some of those things that maybe Oklahoma's not ready for, and I think then you can win a football game.
In my opinion, Army is a better, more complete football team right now than Oklahoma is. And the fact that Navy did what they did against Army shows that they could do it against Oklahoma as well. You've got to come out and run the ball immediately. And just like they did against Army, just like they did on the opening drive, you established the offensive line. That offensive line played so well. I cannot state it enough. They played so well against Army. You got to do that again against the front seven of Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a really good run defense. When I said earlier it was the 12th ranked run defense, I was thinking Oklahoma. I gave it to their former conference opponent in West Virginia. This one, it's true. They are the 12th ranked run defense in the country. You got to break through at some point. and you got to do so on the ground. If they don't run the ball, that's Navy's bread and butter. They're 7th in the country in terms of rushing yardage per game for a reason. If they do not run the ball, you're not going to beat Oklahoma, plain and simple. So that's the way that you win this game, is you establish it early, you win the line of scrimmage, and then, and only then, you strike for the big play over the top with Blake Horvath. That's where you make it happen with Oklahoma, and you win that game going home.
So Kyle's keys to beating Oklahoma for Navy: go back to the blind side and Sandra Bullock.
Run the dang ball. Make it happen.
So we talked about Navy and we talked about their opponent, Army, and talking about you being right. You told me after ECU, going into ECU playing Army,
yes,
that they would eventually be a bowl eligible team. And I said that you are crazy, but here we are. Military Bowl bound.
You still say I'm crazy. So.
I know. I mean, you know what? You were right. And it's on
7-5 too.
I know. So East Carolina, NC
had some room
State.
to work.
I know, right? Anyway, when you look at this matchup, what do you expect from the Pirates against NC State?
Well, I expect them to have the right game plan. I really love what Harrell has done as a coaching staff. I love the way they've put a guy like Hauser in a position to be successful. And they put Caden Hauser in those opportunities, and he's taken full advantage. I give credit to the guys around him. I give credit to the coaching staff and all of the game plans along the way. NC State has a defense that is mid-level. I think they're in the mid-50s in terms of total defense this year, whereas East Carolina still knows how to score, and they showed that down the stretch by winning those games and making it really tough. At the end of the year, they played really well against Navy, but still fell in that game. You may look at the wins that they had. It was all against the bottom half of the conference, and you may scoff at it and say, yeah, you're supposed to beat Temple. You're supposed to beat Florida Atlantic. But the fact that they fired their coach midway through the season, they could have been the bottom half of the conference team that we're talking about. Oh, you should have beaten ECU. You should have beaten the Pirates. That's not the case. They said, you know what? Forget that. We're going to rally around Blake Harrell, and he's going to lead us to a bowl game and 7 wins after, of course, the season that they had a year ago where they were not in the postseason. So East Carolina's excited for this. You get a chance to play amongst the Carolinas. You get to play a rival in NC State that you don't get to see all the time out of the ACC, who's been playing pretty good ball with C.J. Bailey at the quarterback position as well. You got to find a way to keep that effectiveness and take care of the football. If you're East Carolina, that's where you end up finding some success in this game.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's really stood out to me about the Pirates is their resiliency, because they could have just easily, as you said, been like, okay, like, we lost to Charlotte. That was a mess. Like, let's just put our heads down and try again next year. They didn't. And not only did they continue that resiliency throughout the season, you saw it play out in games too. Mm-hmm. That North Texas game just will always stick in my mind, the way that they fought back in that.
Yeah.
It might have been Rajay Harris with that run where he broke through.
It was Harris.
Yeah, broke through like, I don't even know how many North Texas defenders. And
let's just say 12 of
well,
them.
Basically, I don't even know. I think a fan was in there too that he ran through as well. But I just
think it was me. I was trying to stop him.
Kyle was like, that's my alma mater. They can't lose again. But anyway,
he still broke the tackle, so he kept going.
He did. Maybe you'll have to hit the gym then, do some morning miles and yeah. But anyway, I think that resiliency has just continued to show up for ECU, and I think if they continue with that in this bowl game as well, in addition to all of those things that you just said, they give themselves a good chance. And so I'll ask you your keys for this one, since I gave mine for the last one.
Yeah,
we both did, I guess.
I would say with Hauser taking care of the football, he's upped his completion percentage, his yards per completion, and touchdowns from season to season, going from 23 to 24, all while lowering interceptions and mistakes along the way. You've got to continue to do so, or do outside of that. You've got to continue to support Rajay Harris and what he brings to the table from a running back standpoint. They've got a stable of receivers: Smith, Sowell, Wright Jr. All of these guys are capable targets and need to have a good game against a defense that's going to give them opportunities. I think this is going to be a high-scoring affair between NC State and ECU. And if that's the case, I really do think ECU has a chance to win it. NC State's a good football team, and I really like C.J. Bailey, a quarterback. If he's available to play going into this bowl game, I think they've got a chance to win it. But ECU is going to keep it close, and it's going to be a battle back and forth.
Speaking of battles, let's move to our other military academy
Nice.
in the American Army and Louisiana Tech. This is an interesting setup. This is the Independence Bowl. They were originally slated to play Marshall. Army was in this game. Marshall did not have enough players to field a team.
Had over 25 players hit the transfer portal.
That's a lot of players. So you see the timeline there, December 7th.
That's wild.
I can't even comprehend it. They win the Sun Belt, December 8th.
Charles Huff named Southern Miss as head coach. They let him move on. NC State defensive coordinator was named the head coach, Tony Gibson. And then within a week, they had so many players elevate out of the transfer portal because of the fact that Marshall allowed for their coach to leave and move on to Southern Miss. A lot of those players were under his tutelage, and part of the reason why they win the Sun Belt title, it really was a cause and effect reaction up in Huntington, West Virginia. Wild scenario, and honestly, I hate it for those players because they had a chance to go to a bowl game, play against a really good Army team.
Yeah.
And now you give an opportunity to an entirely new program in Louisiana Tech. So you're happy for Louisiana Tech, but it's tough for Marshall. They don't get the opportunity to cap off what was otherwise a great season for the Thundering Herd.
I know, and it's so tough because you win your conference, and that gives you an opportunity to also continue winning, to continue to showcase your program, and now you don't have that opportunity to. And Louisiana Tech now has an opportunity to step into that role, but it's also an interesting situation because you might have thought your season was done. So my biggest question is, like, how are you training? How are you preparing? And now you have to quick get ready for an Army opponent. You have to quick get back into shape. And not that you were that much out of shape, but still, I know when I was done playing a season, you mentally go to a different kind of like, okay, you might be recovering for a couple of weeks. You might be just getting like decompressing. So I think that's going to be an interesting matchup. Now, on the Army side, I think that we talked a little bit about this before the show. I think that, no pun intended, but they're going to go guns a-blazing.
Nice.
Into all the puns, right? All the military puns, guns a-blazing into this matchup, especially after coming off that loss to Navy.
Oh, they've got something to prove.
Oh,
now.
yes, they do.
That's one area where Louisiana Tech is going to get the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
Yes, they get to drive down the road. Of course, Ruston, about a 45-minute drive to Shreveport. They're going to have some fans there in attendance going to a bowl game for the first time in a couple of years. But, oh, my goodness, Army, with the way that they played against Army-Navy, and we just talked about that a moment ago, if they have one chance to get to 12 wins, which they do, they have one more chance to do it, get to 12 wins, cap off what will still be a historic season in West Point by capping off a win against Louisiana Tech in Shreveport, Louisiana. By goodness, they're gonna give it everything they've got. They'll be rested. They're gonna have some extra time going into this game. I anticipate Army to put the hurt on Louisiana Tech and do so early, like they've done throughout the season. Scoring on opening drives against opponents is the calling card of Army football. I would be shocked if they don't do so in this game.
And you have Bryson Daly as leading the way, as we've seen him done the entire season. See him do the entire season, and I think he'll have a little bit more rest as well. They had a grueling schedule in that back half of the season, and then they played the American Conference Championship game. They look amazing in it, and then they have that game against Navy. And so I think just all of those games, now they have a chance to rest, but they have Bryson Daly, who was 6th in Heisman voting. I just think that, man, this is a game that I wouldn't want to be Louisiana Tech in.
No, not at this point. And I'm happy that they get these opportunities, but let's just talk about Bryson Daly here for a second. Of course, the American Athletic Conference Offensive Player of the Year. The fact that Bryson Daly's season went the way that it was maybe not a surprise. I think all of us anticipated him being really good at the start of the year, but it's still unbelievable. Top 6 in Heisman voting from a military academy in the year of 2024 is something that should not be shrugged at. And Tim Pernetti, the commissioner of the conference, of course, voiced his thoughts, thought that he should be in New York as a part of the Heisman ceremony. They invited 4 guys, 4 very deserving players. The fact that he was only 2 players outside of that shows just how legitimate of a statement that is from Pernetti and from the conference as a whole. The fact that Daly has been as good as he has, and the season that he's had altogether should not be diminished even in the slightest, by how this team played against Navy last week.
Well, the thing about Bryson Daly is you see it in his numbers and you see how strong he is in just running the football. But the biggest thing for me, and I think I've said it multiple times on this show, is his leadership. And I asked Jeff Monken about that, what makes him such a leader, and he just spoke so much about his ability to perform in the big moments. Now, I know that Navy game is the anomaly, right? But even against Notre Dame, Bryson Daly had that leadership. He still was trying to will his way through. And so I think that that is something that doesn't show up on those numbers. And I call him a leader of leaders multiple times because that's exactly what he is. Everybody at Army West Point is going to be leading in some capacity. Bryson Daly leads that football team in just the way that he carries himself, but also in the way that he runs the football, the way that he passes, the way that he just commands that offense. And so I want to make sure that we give him his flowers. We have all year long. But that one game against Navy does not diminish the kind of player and person that Bryson Daly is.
No, it's going to be disappointing to look back on this season if you're an Army fan. And that's part of the motivation that Navy had in general to win that game, was to upend the momentum that Army had as a program and continuously say, hey, I know you had a great year in 2024, but we still got you in Landover. That's going to be Navy's bragging rights from here on out.
Yes.
And unfortunate for Army, but they've still got a chance to do something great, which is win 12 games, win a conference title and a bowl game. For any program across the country, that is a winning season and a historic season. Guy inside the top 10 in terms of Heisman voting, that's an incredible year. So looking forward to that. My key to getting a win in this game, you got to reestablish the line of scrimmage. Why did you lose against Navy? Navy dominated up front early in that football game, and you never really got it back. Establish that early. You are the more the more physical, the bigger, the more talented football team over the top of Louisiana Tech. Make sure that is known early. They're going to have crowd. There's going to be a lot of red, white, and blue from the Bulldog fandom from Ruston, Louisiana. I've spent a lot of time in Ruston, Louisiana, oddly enough, just calling games and being around that fan base. They're excited about this, even though their team is 5-7. So Army's going to have a ton of fans, too, just because they're Army and you get the military aspect of it. Use that early and silence that Louisiana Tech crowd when you get an opportunity, like you have all season long, and score on that opening drive by establishing the line of scrimmage.
We've seen Army do that all season long, just scoring on that opening drive. They've done a very good job.
One of the best at doing so.
Yeah, and that's why I think Navy took that game away from them, is they kind of played them at their own game. They scored first early and often. If Army does that in their bowl game, I think they'll be okay. We have more bowl games to talk about.
Okay.
North Texas, Texas State in the First Responder Bowl. This is your alma mater. I'll let you kick this one off.
Yes, in-state rivalry from the home of SMU, just down the road at Gerald Ford Stadium in Dallas, Texas. Excited about the fact that North Texas got here in the first place. Of course, we talked about the way they started the season, 5-1. They were budding. They were right up there at the top, taking Memphis down to the wire, challenging Tulane at home down to the wire, looking like they were a team that could compete for a spot in the American Conference title game. That didn't work out. You ended up finishing 1-5. That final win of the regular season, though, puts you into a postseason berth in a bowl game against Texas State. So let me be very, very clear by this. You started 5-1. You went through the 5-game losing streak, but you won against Temple late in the year to get yourself into a bowl game. All will be forgotten. All will be forgiven if you win a bowl game. It'll be the first bowl win for North Texas since 2013 when they took down a UNLV team in the Heart of Dallas Bowl. Derek Thompson was the quarterback. Derek Thompson's now an assistant principal and a coach at Rock Hill High School in Prosper, Texas. I mean, it's been a long time since they've ended up playing and winning in a bowl game. They've played in a couple bowl games under Seth Luttrell. This is the first under Eric Morris. All will be forgotten and forgiven if you can just beat Texas State. So, with that being said, you're going to rely on the high-flying offense of Chandler Morris, right?
No.
Oh, he transferred to Virginia. That's unfortunate. He had a great season, though. 3,700 yards, 31 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. At least you've got DT Sheffield, one of the best receivers in the American Conference to throw the football to, right?
No.
Oh, he answered the transfer portal as well. 66 receptions, 822 yards, and 11 touchdowns. So, okay, you've lost a couple of those guys. I get it. But here's the thing. You still have this guy that's on a headset who's one of the highest offensive regarded play callers in all of collegiate football. His name is Eric Morris. Did he enter the transfer portal, Maria?
He did not enter the transfer portal, and I'm going to say something about Eric Morris, too. I was on that last game where they qualified for a bowl,
yes,
right?
You were.
You know what he said the entire time leading up to that game against Temple. Now, they still had to qualify. They had to win that game to get to the bowl
down
game.
To the wire.
You know who he was playing in a lot of those spots? Were the freshmen, were the young guys. He had a lot of faith in those younger guys, and he thinks that they were going to be the future of this North Texas program. And so, trust me, it really sucks that you don't have Chandler Morris at quarterback and GT Sheffield, and he's not there anymore. But I think that Eric Morris was already looking at the young guys making big plays for him. So I think that from the outside, everybody's panicking, right? But on the inside and what they've been looking at, that is who Eric Morris has been kind of putting his faith in already. And he flat out said that when we were getting ready to call that game. He's like, you're going to see a lot of young guys tomorrow. And I was like, all right, let's see it. And one of those young guys solidified that victory at the end with the interception to send that, to basically end that game. And so, I mean, I know you're an alum, so you maybe are like a little less optimistic, but I think that Eric Morris was already thinking ahead a little bit, and he has some young guys that might be able to make a difference in this bowl game.
I don't know if I'm less optimistic. Yes, I would have loved to have Chandler Morris and DT Sheffield. We've talked about them at nauseum throughout the year. They're just as
you can't replace
unbelievable of a talent as you have had in the American Conference. However, they still have guys like a Damon Ward Jr., like a Blair Conrad, Shane Porter. Most of all, I talked about Eric Morris and the system that he has. They have the ability to score points even then. Drew Mestamaker is anticipated to start. I think they're going to keep that pretty close to the chest on who's actually going to be behind center whenever that time comes around. He'll have a month, over a month, to get ready for this matchup because Chandler Morris did transfer out as early as he did, has already committed to Virginia. They have a young quarterback in Mestamaker who has some prowess at the quarterback position, who has some talent. I love his arm talent. We got to see him a little bit in that game that I called earlier in the year against Wyoming. He came in, played well in that. You've got the weapons outside of DT Sheffield. That will be the same microcosm as a whole. The one thing, you've got to play a really good Texas State team that kind of pitter-pattered down the stretch after a hot start. Let's talk about the way that they started the year. 49-10 over UTSA. Now, we talked about UTSA. They were not the same team at the beginning of the year as they were at the end of the year. They took Big 12 champion Arizona State down to the wire and lost by a field goal in that game. And they routed Troy 38-17. But they finished 3-3 in their last 6 games. They lost to Old Dominion. They lost to Louisiana. They lost to Georgia State. So I want to put common opponents against each other. UTSA, South Florida. North Texas played both of those teams. Of course, North Texas lost in a shootout against UTSA on the road at the Alamo Dome. You had the 49-10 win for Texas State at home against UTSA. Then you play South Florida. North Texas beat South Florida pretty handily in the opening game of the year. Texas State won that game, but they didn't look great in that matchup against South Florida. So I think there's going to be a tight matchup between the two. You got to slow down Jordan McLeod at quarterback. He's a really good quarterback. This defense from North Texas has had their struggles all year long. If there's a reason for pessimism in this game, it's going to be around the defense, not necessarily the offense for North Texas.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And because the defense of North Texas
against South Alabama, by the way. What did I say a minute ago?
I thought you said that, didn't you?
South Florida is what I said.
Florida.
I said South Alabama is what I'm supposed to say.
Too many American teams in your head. We already talked about South Florida.
Yeah, we talked about them.
Yeah,
go Bulls.
I think you confused me a little bit.
South Alabama is the common opponent, not South Florida.
South Alabama is the common opponent. But going back to that North Texas defense, that's been a storyline this entire season of can they figure it out. And so I think, as you said, the other thing with that Texas State offense is that they are a little bit more, I guess, put together is not the word I want, but they have less put together. They have less people in the portal or lost less people. So I think that might be a determining factor. And so that was one of my keys, is just overcoming some of that youth that North Texas has. If they can, as you said, they had about a month to prepare. If they can just prepare in the right way and maybe overcome some of that, that can help them against Texas State. But I think it's just going to come down to who plays better on that day. But Texas State has a little bit of an advantage there because they have the more veteran person at quarterback.
Yes, I agree. And the defense, too. I think Texas State has a really good defense. North Texas has a really good offense, even without Chandler Morris in the fray. It's going to be interesting to see how these two teams match up. North Texas will have a crowd advantage, I believe. I hope if you're a North Texas fan, I've got my tickets to this game too. If you're in the area, make your way to SMU Stadium. Go show out because it's the first time you've been in the bowl game in a couple of years. Last time you were in the Frisco Bowl against Boise State and Ashton Ginty a couple years ago, you lost by a field goal in that game, less than a field goal in that game. Now you've got a shot to win it for the first time since 2013. I hope that North Texas faithful, even despite the pitter-patter at the end of the year, is still able to come out and win the crowd battle between the two in-state rivals between North Texas and Texas State. It's going to be a fun one overall. Let's take a look at the whole slate, though. Across the board, we've got 8 games as a whole. Of course, getting things kicked off in the Frisco Bowl between Memphis and West Virginia. Excited about all of the games across the board, but it's going to be tough to really pick a favorite out of the bunch.
I know. I'm excited about all of them. I think with Memphis getting things started, I'm excited about that one because they don't have anything to lose and they have a lot of veterans leading the way. I don't know if I can pick a favorite, though. I'm going to watch all of them. And,
go to as many as we possibly can. Here's the second page of the bowl schedule.
We already talked about which one we like a lot in that
matchup.
I
think it's Oklahoma Navy for me. That's going to be a fun one overall. Can't wait for all of the matchups as a whole. Do you have the ability, let me ask you this, do you have the ability to predict just a record, not who's going to win, who's going to lose, but just an overarching record of how the 8 games will turn out from the American?
I mean, as the director of video communications and reporter at the American Conference, I hope we go 8-0.
8-0, baby.
But no, I think we have a winning record.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what it's going to be. I hope. I think there's a possibility that we could go 8-0.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's also postseason football and more people can enter the portal before any of these teams even play. So I'm going to say we're going to have a winning record. Okay. I don't know what that winning record is going to be, but I want the American to have a winning record in all of their bowl games.
I'll put out my specific
Go ahead. Yep. Go ahead.
Post. I'll do so before the Frisco Bowl, so it'll already be on my Twitter by the time we end up posting this later. But I'll say 5-3 across the board. I think the American has a chance, like you said, winning record, 2 games above 500. I think that's a very successful bowl season. Right now, when you look at the Vegas odds as a whole, you're favored in 3 games. That's underachieving in my opinion. I think
it's more than 3 games. Like I just don't agree with that.
I'd be surprised if they don't win 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a winning record at least 500. I don't think the 3-5 is indicative of what can actually happen.
Yeah, but I'll put some actual predictions out there here in a little bit.
Okay,
it'll be fun.
We'll tune into them.
Yes, do so. You know what's time for us to tune into?
Top plays.
Top plays. We got 5 plays top around the American Conference this past week. Let's let you start things off this week.
Oh, okay. We're going to start on the basketball court. I know we talked a lot of football, but this one, UAB in Arkansas State. Blazers up big in this one. This one tossed over to Christian Coleman. He just slams it down. We love a good alley-oop.
Alley-oop, baby. Blazers get it done. What they didn't get it done in the game, right? They ended up losing that.
Yeah, they were up really big at that point.
That's unfortunate.
It's all right. It's early in the season. They just got to win at the end.
Play.
Yeah, non-conference.
Hey, we'll talk basketball when we get into it. That's still going to be a really good Blazers team. Now, moving on to number 4 from here, let's go to another green team. How about South Florida men's basketball taking on Utah State? The Steel defense turning into offense, and a little highlight as well for C.J. Brown. I love it when you can book into possession. You've got the defense leading to offense, and the fact that he came from behind, poked out by a teammate, went right to C.J. Brown, and then boom, got the slam to finish it off.
Steal it to the slam. The alliteration in that too is just outstanding. It's like I wrote that or something.
It's almost like you wrote it.
I know.
Did you write this next one, the number 3 top play?
I did, number 3, because this one was fun. I got to watch this one live, but we talked about Army and Navy, and we talked about Navy dominating from the beginning and just holding on to that lead the entire game. Here's Bryson Daly. He's going to try to scramble, throws the ball out. Look at Andrew Duhart just diving across the middle, and he bobbles it a little bit, but Kenneth McShann came up with the football, held on to it for the interception. Now, talk about team. We were just talking about the team of South Florida poking the ball out for the steal in slow motion, too. The dive across the middle. He holds on and never hits the ground. McShann just, whoop, right there.
How about that? What a play from the Navy defense. How is this number 3?
Because wait till we see number 1. It's my favorite.
Okay. Before we get to number 1, from number 3, we've got to go to number 2. Let's go back to the hardwood. How about a little women's basketball? Charlotte in the middle of a battle with Winthrop, and the battle won by Amani Smith. This is the 6th block of the game on a breakaway lay-in. 49ers says, no thanks. Amani Smith's going to have that one for you. No chance at the bucket. Thought it was an easy lay-in. Not going to happen against the Charlotte 49ers bunch. Boom.
Oof.
With the block.
I love it. Like the complete confidence. She gets all ball on that one. 49ers had 9 blocks in this game. So it was
that was number 6
I know.
along the way.
I know.
They still had 3 more ready.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, block party.
Do not enter the paint. No paint allowed against Charlotte.
All right, so now we got to talk about number 1, though, because this one was exciting. So Navy pulling out all the stops against Army. And some trick plays. Look, you think it's a punt. Whoop. No, it's a fake punt. And the big man with the ball, now he does fumble it, Landon Robinson. But again, teammates stepping up, stepping in. They fall on the ball. When I watched this live, I was like, no way. There he goes. And then boom. That was a good tackle on the Army side. But Navy holds on to the ball. And I love a good big man run. That's just so exciting to me.
Big man runs are the best. And fake punts, when they work, are some of the more exciting plays in football. Who's been the best in the American and running trick plays throughout the season? Beforehand, it was Army. So this is a little taste of their own medicine from Navy. You talk about the petty at the beginning of the show and the little rivalry, the rivalry between the two.
In college sports.
Exactly. The fact that they ran the fake punt with the big man, said, you slow us down, just try it. Like you said, great tackle. Made at least interesting at the end, but that was a Navy play that you will never forget. I love that being the top play overall here on All-American.
I know. Number 3 was really good too, and number 2, I mean the block party. I mean they're all really good plays. Yes. So I like them all, but that's why I put that one at number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are also very good.
They're all so good. Yes. So good as well. So are you for tuning in to our All-American Bowl preview special. Wow. I mean, it's crazy that we're coming to the end of the football season as a whole. We've got more content for you coming your way on the American Athletic Conference channels. Be sure to subscribe as you can. The American on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the channels along the way. That way you don't miss any of Maria Trivelpeice and the great content that we have from you for the conference side of things. Looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun bowl season as 8 teams. Count them, 8 teams.
2 hands. You need 2 hands to count them.
Get postseason action. Maria, always a pleasure.
I so much enjoyed today's show and all of our shows that we did, and it's been a lot of fun covering American Conference football. And we got some basketball coming up too. We're in basketball season. We saw the steals and the blocks and
it's crossover
all of
season.
Yeah, we haven't slept in a little bit, but it's been fun.
No sleep for the American. For Maria Trivelpeice, Zach and Chris in the back, and everybody that has their hands on All-American all season long, I'm Kyle Youmans saying so long from Studio A. We'll see you next time.